weren't out here today. We are. So I appreciate the fact that you've come out here to find out more about what's going on in your community, in our community. And I know that there's been a lot of concern as we've seen next door to the church here, the development of an apartment complex. I want you to know that we first kind of started looking at this when we got calls from some local people who said, hey, what's going on? It looks like there's some construction going on next to the church. We immediately did what we could to find out about it. And what we found out was not very encouraging, and that was an apartment complex was being developed right next to the church here. I and my staff looked into all of the different matters subject to the property, and we talked with the developer, we've talked with people from the church, we've talked with people from all of our city agencies, the city attorney's office, Department of Developmental Services, TCI. We've tried to explore every avenue to determine what is going on. Has it been authorized? Is it authorized? Is there anything we can do to stop it? And I'll tell you, if I had an opportunity to stop this project, I would have. The first day I knew if there was an opportunity for me to have any influence on it. As some of you know, I've been not happy with the growth of development in our area, too many apartments, just like the one down at the corner of Blanco and Bitters. But a lot of the things that we see today are the results of the actions that were taken years ago. I think a lot of us don't understand the entire process about land use and land development, how and when it can be developed. And many times it's very disappointing to find out that that green belt on the other side of our fence, so to speak, is going to turn out to be a commercial center or an apartment complex. But whenever I have an opportunity to intervene on behalf of you, as my neighbors in this district, I do, and do everything we can to make sure whatever is done right, and if it can be put off, deterred, or stopped because the community doesn't feel it's appropriate, then I fight for that. This is one of those circumstances where we don't have the ability to stop this from all of the research that we have done. I've asked Mike Shannon, the Director of Developmental Services, to come up and explain the process to you. And we're here to answer your questions, but if you'll give Mike the opportunity to explain the process, what we know about this particular piece of land and its land use development, I think that all of us will have a greater understanding of the situation. So Mike, I'm going to ask you to take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Good evening, everyone. As the Councilman had said, my name is Mike Shannon. So I'm the Director of your City Development Services Department, and what that means is whenever someone wants to build something, whether it's a house, an apartment complex, high-rise downtown, or a new shopping center, whatever, they come through Development Services to get permits. And during that permit review, we re-review everything from the platting stage of the process. That's getting the property ready for development, zoning, the building construction, building codes, fire codes, drainage, traffic. It actually all starts through our department. We have some members here from the Transportation and Capital Improvement Department. They actually have the review part of most of the traffic and the drainage, but it all kind of works together. So the city reviews these projects for conformance with local and state law. Okay, so that's kind of how the process works. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this particular project and some of its history. So this particular project has come to us over the last couple of years in different ways. First, the owner of the property requested verification of their vesting and continued land use. So what that means is essentially grandfathering. We live in the state of Texas, so some of you are probably very familiar with this, others may not have ever heard this, so bear with me as I walk through this. Texas, as many of you know, is a property rights state. So there are a lot of laws in the state of Texas, so I have to have team members, including Melissa Ramirez and her team. Melissa, if you could wait a minute. is my assistant director over the land development. And one of the things that we have to do is when someone applies for grandfathering rights, we actually have to review that. And we work with our city attorney's office because it's a very legal issue. And we review that. And what that says is if the property had a permit for a project years ago, and the project has remained valid and unchanged, so there's a process to review that, that property owner gets to keep those rights. And those rights can be continuation of land use, which is actually zoning. Others can be, they don't have to follow rules that are important to us here in the city, things like tree preservation, some of the water quality. And I'll just give kind of the summary, and I know there'll be some questions, but this project has a valid preliminary, what's called the preliminary overall development plan, that was established back in 1986. So that was prior to this property being annexed into the city. That was prior to the city's first tree preservation ordinance. So what that means is they get to follow those rules at the time in terms of the project that they're going to build and the tree preservation or lack thereof. Many of you probably know we have a tree preservation ordinance here in the city, but that didn't start until 1997. Okay, so as much as we don't like that, including me as the Director of Government Services, if it meets state law and meets local law, we have to allow them to proceed with building permits. So what that means is they've submitted plans for permit, and what they usually start off with after that is the plat review, which is getting all the easements, the Time Warner cable, the CPS electrical, and what have you. They also apply for a tree permit, which is their authority to basically cut down the existing trees on site. Now, because they were vested back to the regulations in effect in 1986 for the land, they didn't have to save a single tree. And I think many of you can see that unfortunately they chose not to save. I'm not sure there's a single tree saved. I'm pretty sure that we verified that. They were legally allowed to do that, but they chose to do that. Okay? So they were able to do that, and they did get their tree permit, and that was approved. Now that happened late last year. That happened, I think it was November. Late last year, November. I think they just started the tree clearing after the first of the year. They didn't do it right away. What they also have in for review right now is the building permit plans. The building permit plans are under review, so we're reviewing everything from like building code compliance and electrical code compliance. We have issued them, certainly, as you see the construction, they have permission to start their site work, so they clear the trees, they can get the site ready, they can do site utilities, bringing in water, electric, getting it ready. They do not have permission to build vertical yet, because those pieces are still under review. So many of you know, I talked about annexation. I think a lot of you know this area was annexed back in 1997, so it used to be part of the county. We do have some regulatory authority in the county, the city does, in our ETJ, our extraterritorial jurisdiction. I think that's where the preliminary overall development plan, or that preliminary 1986 permit came from. It was in the county, but still within our purview at that time. It is currently zoned. When it was annexed, the city did try to zone it, and did, in fact, zone it PUD R6, ERZD. What that means is essentially single-family zoning. So had the developer or the owner of the property who was in control of that ever lost their grandfather, and there's a bunch of checks and balances to keep it valid or to expire it, had they lost that, it would have had to be single-family zones or go through the rezoning process, which would have constituted a big outreach, through the councilman's office, through our state law about notifying neighbors all around the property. But because they didn't need to do that, there wasn't a public notification through the zoning process or a city council action. I think that's the overall summary of where we're at and why we're there, based on some of the questions that I think have come through the city council's office towards us that we have reviewed, double-checked on our side with our city attorney, and then ready to hear to answer any questions. I do have some staff members. I'm sorry, Melissa's asking. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. So last week there was a question about the right-of-way permit. Yes, sir.
One question before you go to right-of-way.
Sure.
Is it my understanding that the same owner that owned it in 1986
No, that's not correct.
So the right of grandfathering doesn't change when the property changes hands?
That's correct. That's an excellent question. So grandfathering on many of the land use rights that we have with the state of Texas to authorize grandfathering or vesting, some of those things, it's not subject to the same property owner. So you can sell your land, and as long as the project or the preliminary plan remains valid, the rights or the grandfathering of that can stay. That's an excellent question.
Who determines if it's valid? When does that get determined?
The way the question was, and I know there's some mics here. I don't know. Do we want to use those mics, or if you don't want to use those mics, I'll just repeat your question. Is that okay? So the question was, who determines if the rights are valid? So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, a property owner will submit to the city, my department, an application form because they believe that they're vested or grandfathered. And they will give us the paperwork, give us all the old permits, and we actually do a review. My staff in development services, where the city has to review it, we actually coordinate with the city attorney's office because a lot of it's based on state law, and there's a couple of specific chapters in state law, but a few others that we review. And as long as we can verify that yes, there was a permit, a previous permit, the project has remained unchanged and valid. There's a valid means it hasn't died, expired, and in the state law there's a lot of checks and balances. So when we review that, if it meets those criteria, we approve, meaning development services approves that yes, you are grandfathered per the state law.
Do you mind if I ask one more question?
You can, yes. I think we have 2 hours. You can ask many questions.
It has not, the project has not changed. How did the project, was the project always apartments in 1986?
Yes, the proposed project had multifamily as part of that preliminary overall development plan. I'm just going to call it a preliminary project plan for now, if that's okay. Yeah, so there was actually multiple potential uses. One of them was multifamily, which captured it. If it had only said, for example, commercial, okay, and they wanted to use multifamily, then we would have denied that. And there are some that they try to, get grandfathered, and we show them that no, it did change.